Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time to begin our regular halacha shiur. Last week, we began speaking about Kol Nidrei, and we saw the basic principles. We saw the underlying machlokas, the underlying machloket, the underlying disagreement among the great Rishonim, the great medieval authorities, regarding the question, what is Kol Nidre all about? What's the whole purpose? We saw, on the one hand, Rabbeinu Tam taught us that Kol Nidre is an announcement, a proclamation, a decree where each of us individually says, from now on, I declare that any neder, any vow which I'm going to make in the future, I declare as of now that I regret making it a vow. I don't necessarily regret doing what I say I'm going to do. I might indeed want to. I might want to fulfill the neder. What I regret is placing upon myself the obligation of a vow. Someone says he or she is going to go, makes a vow that he or she is going to go on a certain diet. Well, the person doesn't regret trying to follow the diet. What the person regrets is now having the Torah obligation and therefore running the risk of getting into trouble and violating the Torah mitzvah, in addition to violating the diet, which is of its own importance. Well, according to Rabbeinu Tam, since Kol Nidre has to do with this declaration, and since it has to do with future vows, you can't retroactively say you regretted something if you didn't regret it at the time you said it. Since it has to do with future vows, it must be formulated in the future from this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, the upcoming year, during the new year. All my vows should be null and void. I don't necessarily regret the obligations that the vow refers to. I just regret having created for myself a new Torah obligation of a vow, which runs the risk of getting me into trouble in violating the vow. That's Rabbeinu Tam. Then we also saw last week the opposing opinion, the opinion of the Rosh. Um, Incidentally, it's fairly unusual that Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh disagree with each other. There are examples, but not a lot of examples. Usually those two great figures are together. In any event, on this issue, the Rosh disagreed with Rabbeinu Tam. He held that what Kol Nidre is all about is releasing vows from the past. You shouldn't have made the vow in the first place. Of course, you want good advice. Don't make any vows. You want to do something? Do it. You want to refrain from something? Refrain from it. But why take upon yourself? Why take upon yourself the burden of a vow? Oh, yeah, we're gonna maybe we'll get to the halach distinction between vows and other things, but according to the Rosh, once again, we're nullifying vows from the past. After all, the Torah says that a bet din, a rabbinic court, can release you from your vows. That's a very broad statement, and of course doesn't apply to every vow in the world. We're going to see in the course of this evening that all the Poskim point out that the release of vows is impossible if the vow refers to an interpersonal obligation which you have imposed upon yourself. I'm not going to speak to my neighbor So if someone says he or she is not going to speak to the neighbor from now on because they're a horrible person, well, that creates an interpersonal relationship. Alternatively, someone wants to make a vow, twice every week I'm going to go visit the old lady who lives next door, the old man who lives next door, just to keep them company for an hour. Well, a vow which involves interpersonal relationships, that's off the table. Kol Nidrei cannot release, a Bet Din cannot release you from that. Uh, but vows which are only between you and God. Oh, I'm going to do this mitzvah or that mitzvah, whatever it is, if it's only between you and God, then a bet din can release you, and that's what Kol Nidrei does. Of course, according to this view, the view of the Rosh, that we're talking about Hataras Nedarim, release of vows, you need three people. A bet din, a rabbinic court, which releases vows, must be constituted with at least three judges on it. It's not the sort of thing that you can do without three judges, and therefore you're going to need three people for Hataras Nedarim. The Chazan could be one of them, and two people will stand next to the Chazan representing a bet din. You can have more than three, but you have to have at least three. And this, of course, raises the question of who's going to release the vows of the Chazan and the two other people who are standing next to him representing the Bet Din. But we'll come to this in the course of this evening. Those are the two big approaches. And according to the Rosh, the formulation of Kol Nidrei has to be in the past tense. We're releasing vows from last Yom Kippur until now, until this Yom Kippur. Then, once we got these basic ideas in hand, we looked at this lovely tshuva of the Radbaz. The Radbaz was asked, which of these two approaches is the correct one? Should we formulate Kol Nidrei in the future because it's a proclamation like Rabbeinu Tam said, or should we formulate it in the past because it has to do with releasing vows? We began looking at this tshuva of the Rashba. He pointed out that different communities followed different approaches, and then he comes to his conclusions. Here are the conclusions of the Radbaz, which we didn't actually get to last week. He says, Mashani Ragil, the way I do it, my customary practice in my synagogue, he was the chief rabbi of Egypt, right at the cusp of the end of the Middle Ages, the beginning of modern times. We'll let historians argue about precise periodization, exactly when the Middle Ages ended and exactly when modern times began. We can let historians argue about that, but he was right at that time period, at the cusp of modernity. In any event, he said, what I customarily do in my synagogue, he was in charge, of course, of his synagogue. He was the chief rabbi of Egypt. I say both. In my shul, in my synagogue, and here in Egypt, we do both. We say from last Yom Kippur until this Yom Kippur, and then we add, and from this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur. We combine both the approaches of Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh. We do both. We do both Hataras Nedarim for past vows, and we also do the proclamation for future vows. Mitkavnim, and we have in mind, Lahatir Masha Avar, we have in mind that we're releasing the vows from the past, those which are releasable, which is possible to release, Masha Atid, and we have in mind also the nullification of future vows by our present declaration that from here forth we do not, from here forth we have regret regarding any vow we might make in the future. These are the words I use in Kol Nidrei. Miyom Kippurim she'avar ad Yom Kippurim haba aleinu l'shalom. Combines it all into a single phrase. From last Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, a period of 24 months, all included in a single phrase. We're talking about all the Nidarim from last Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, a period of 24 months. V'im tomar, and if you will tell me, kevan shebashana she'avar batul la'atid, if already last year I made the proclamation regarding all future vows, why do I have to return? Why do I have to repeat the proclamation regarding future vows every year? Once, once in your lifetime, shortly after bar or bas mitzvah, that should be enough to make a declaration for all future vows. From now on, I regret any slip of the tongue. From now on, I regret any pronouncement of a vow I might make. I just regret it. Why not just do it once, shortly after bar or bas mitzvah? Lama yatir b'shana zo shavar. Why do we need it over and over again? Hare mutarim v'omdim hem. Having said it once, the proclamation should stand in effect permanently. There's no reason why the proclamation should expire after 1 year. Lo kasha klal. This is not really a good objection. The idea is as follows. If you make the proclamation, I hereby declare from now on, I regret any future vow I might make. And then a week later, a month later, a year later, at some point, you get angry, you get excited, and for some reason, you're motivated, and for some reason, you make a vow at some point in the future. Naughty you really shouldn't do it, but you do it anyway. And while you're making this vow, a month after the declaration, a year after the declaration, 2 years, any time, while you're making this vow, which we would rather you don't do, but you're doing it anyway, you remember, oh, I made this declaration in the past, and I remember declaring that from that point on, I regret any vows. Well, I'm overriding that declaration and making a vow now, which is going to be valid and a true vow. If you remember the declaration at the time that you come to make a vow, one declaration cancels the other declaration. Pronouncing the vow now, if you remember the first declaration, cancels the first declaration, and now the vow is a valid vow. The declaration that you regret all future vows works only as long as you have forgotten having made that vow. And therefore, it's a good idea to renew the vow. Therefore, it's a good idea to renew the proclamation from time to time, because in the course of time you might very well cancel the proclamation if you remember it and say, well, I'm canceling that previous declaration that I have regrets making a vows now. I really mean to do it. So it's good to do it in a iterative way over and over again. That's why we do it every year. And if the vow was only between you and God, then the Hataras Nedarim, the release of the vows aspect, that will help relieve you from the punishment of having violated a vow. Lekalabechash, we don't have to worry. Shema yava'u lahakel b'nedarim. We don't have to worry that Kol Nidrei is going to lead people into frivolity. We don't have to worry that Kol Nidrei is going to lead people to make frivolous vows, knowing that they can get out of it, or knowing that it's not going to be truly burdensome. We don't have to worry about that. Yeah, people say Belinetta, but let's leave Belinetta for another discussion. Why do we not have to worry about Kol Nidrei encouraging frivolity in making vows, she'ein zo halach l'maisa kishaba'in l'shol hacham, because really, if you need Hataras and Dam, you made a vow between you and God. Uh, vow does not touch upon your fellow man. It only touches upon your religious observance. Um, Someone made a vow to follow some super strict opinions. Someone made a vow to follow some super strict practices. Oh, it's only between you and God. It only has to do with your religious practice. And now you regret having made the vow. Well, if you go to a hacham, if you go to a rabbi, if you go to a rabbinic court and tell the court, I want to be released from this vow. I made this vow that uh, I would rely only on this hechsher and not on that hechsher. I made some vow having to do with my religious practice, and now it's really getting burdensome. The one hechsher I made a vow to rely upon, they're out of business and I have nothing to eat. What can I do? Someone who wants a vow released, if you go to a Besdin and you do it the proper way, Gam ein doshin oto barabim. Well, it's not a public event, um, Hataras Nedarim. It has to be done in private, well, with a bet din, but surely the public is not involved in this. Ela choshvim shehu meklal seder atfila, and therefore everyone thinks, all the people out there in Egypt think, all the Jews think that Kol Nidrei is just part of the prayers for Yom Kippur. Most of the people, and it's true to this very day, most of the people don't even understand the words of Kol Nidre. They think it's just another one of the prayers of Yom Kippur. They don't understand that what they're doing is Hataras Nedarim, Lo Yavo Lizalzel B'Nedarim, and therefore, since the people, the common people, hoi polloi, don't in English, I think we say the hoi polloi for some reason. Like hoi in Greek already means the hoi polloi, so like the Beit HaMidrash. In any event, since the simple people do not realize that they're doing Hataras Nedarim, um, it is Hataras Nedarim. It does release them from their vows, and it does, therefore, relieve them from any punishment that might fall upon them for having violated uh, uh, vows between them and God. But they don't realize that's what's happening, and therefore, it's not going to lead to frivolity. V'lo ya'aleh al datchem, and never think for a moment. Sheyoil heter zeh l'masha ben adam l'chaver klal. Never imagine, never think for a moment that Kol Nidre is going to work. Never think that Kol Nidre is going to have any effect in releasing you from interpersonal obligations that you might have taken upon yourself. V'chein noagim Sfaradim, the Sfaradim in Egypt, as we mentioned last week, throughout North Africa, throughout the Near East, Europe, well, throughout the Jewish world. After the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, we now have two communities living side by side. There's the indigenous, original Jewish community, which had been there for centuries, whether it's London, Amsterdam, Hamburg, Smyrna, Rhodos, Alexandria. We have the original Jewish community, which had been there for many centuries, plus the newly arrived Sephardic community. And the Sfaradim, well, those were the descendants of well, in the first generation, they were the Jews who were expelled from Spain, and in the subsequent generations, their descendants, as opposed to the Musta'arim, who we spoke about last week, they were the Arabic speaking Jews of North Africa, the descendants of the original indigenous Jewish populations there, unlike the Sfaradim who spoke Sfaradit, who spoke Ladino, who spoke 16th century Spanish. So we Sfaradim do both, past and future, last Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, doing both Hataras Nedarim, release of vows for the past, and the proclamation for the future. Ashkenazim, Nechlaku, amongst the Ashkenazim, there are different communities. Some say only like Rabbeinu Tam, having to do with the future, proclamation. Some say like the Rosh, having to do with release of vows in the past. Ashkenazim disagree amongst themselves. Now, of course, as you point out on chat, nowadays we have the Art Scroll, Machzer. Well, even before that, we had other English translations of the Machzer, Russian translations, French translations, and so forth and so on, Yiddish translations, and therefore, unlike in the days of the Radbaz, nowadays people really do know what the meaning of Kol Nidrei is. Well, I'm not so sure about that. It could be. It could be that many people study and understand the meaning of Kol Nidrei because they have the translation in their machzor. That could be, but I would not be surprised to learn that many people ignore the translation, and I would not be surprised to learn that some people might even have read the translation and still not understood what's going on. As I hinted last week, and we're going to see more hints in the literature, in the sources for this idea in a few moments. What I hinted last week was it could be that the real importance of Kol Nidrei rests not in its meaning, its disputed meaning, whether you follow the Rosh or the Rabbeinu Tam. The real significance lies not in its meaning, but rather in its melody. We'll see a little bit more evidence for that idea shortly. How do I turn the page? Here we go. At this point, we have one or two little points to clear up, and then we can see what the modern Poskim. Up to now, we've been speaking about the medieval and right at the beginning of modern times. According to the Rosh, again, Kol Nidrei cannot be done in private, cannot even be done with one person present in addition to yourself. You need at least three. But what about Rabbeinu Tam? According to Rabbeinu Tam, who is talking about this proclamation, does it have to be done in public? What if you don't go to shul? You're sick at home, or if for some reason you're stuck in a airport, say international airport somewhere, and there is no synagogue. According to Rabbeinu Tam, can the proclamation be made in private? Well, the Ritva addresses exactly this question. Harotzeh shelo yitkayemu kol nedarav kol hashana, someone who wants to make a proclamation that from now on he or she regrets any vows that he or she might make, sagi, it is sufficient. To Avid b'Rosh Hashanah, it is sufficient that you do this once a year on, he says Rosh Hashanah, but it could be any time during the year. Avalav dafka, it doesn't have to be specifically at Rosh Hashanah time, or specifically Yom Kippur. Stand up anytime and just make the proclamation. Do it right after class tonight. Beinei l'nafshe, in private, with him, only him, and between him and himself, between her and herself, totally in private, no one else present except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nami matze masne b'dibur zeh. You can make this proclamation even in total, absolute private, only between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ela di'i ovid bifnei shnayim. It's preferable to make the proclamation at least in the presence of two other people. That's preferable. Adif tvei. That's preferable. Mishum chshad haroim, because that will publicize your proclamation. And when people see you violating a vow in the future, they will become aware of your proclamation because you made it in a public way. It will avoid people suspecting you of violating vows which are really invalid. Ki masne b'fnei shnayim o shlosha b'fursim milsa. If you make the proclamation in the presence of two or three people, the more public the proclamation is, and the better it is. You can do it in private, and it works fine in private, but this is the sort of thing which is better done, preferably done in public. Lo asil dechashta. If you make it in public, then when people see you violating a vow that you made, they will not suspect you of being in trouble with God, because they will remember, or they will have heard about your having made the proclamation. It's better, preferable, to do it in public. Now we turn to the modern Poskim. Modern, beginning in the 17th century. Again, we'll let the historians argue about exactly what date modernity began. And of course, the ma'avar, the movement from the Middle Ages to modern times did not occur simultaneously everywhere in the world. And there's clearly not one date that marks the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of modern times everywhere in the world. There are places in the world which still, to this very day, are living in medieval culture. The spread, the modernity, well, historians love to study that. In any event, the Lavush we mentioned last week, he was Rav Mordechai Yaffa, the great disciple of the Ramah. The Ramah, in the beginning of the 16th century, wrote the Ashkenaz notes on the Shulchan Aruch. His great disciple was the Lavush, Rav Mordechai Yaffa. He writes as follows: in Poland. Mishum Kol Nidrei ein sarich shlosha. We don't need three people present at Kol Nidrei. Shekol Nidrei eino ela t'nai l'haba. Kol Nidrei is only a proclamation regarding the future. He's embraced Rabbeinu Tam's approach. Ein sarich shlosha l't'nai. Making a proclamation does not require the presence of three people. Kol echad masnel atzma. You can do it in private. It's only between you and God, after all. Therefore, you can do Kol Nidrei in private. You can say it in private. That's what the Lavush said. But then the Lavush quotes the Bach. No, it's not true. The Bach, on the other hand, he lived a few generations later in Lithuania. He says, Af shehu t'nai l'haba, even though we embrace the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam that Kol Nidrei is a proclamation nullifying future vows, M'kol Makom, nonetheless, Doma Lahataras Nidorim, nonetheless, it does have a certain similarity to releasing vows, canceling vows in the future, releasing vows in the past. There is a clear similarity between them. Asi lachlufe, and people might become confused, people might misunderstand, and people might think that if you can cancel future vows in private, people might come to think you can cancel previous vows in the past. That people might come to misunderstand and think you can release vows in the past in private as well, and that's not true. And also, Hataras Nidarim, releasing vows from the past, cannot be done on Shabbat and Yom Tov. It has to be done during a weekday. Um, Proclamations regarding the future, well, that you can do on Shabbat or Yom Tov. And therefore, since we are embracing the approach of Rabbeinu Tam, we insist that Kol Nidrei be recited before sunset, before Yom Kippur actually begins. Why? If Kol Nidrei were actually release of vows, then it would have to be before sunset, because you can't release vows on Shabbat and Yom Tov, and Yom Kippur is a Yom Tov. But since we're holding that Kol Nidrei is only a release of future vows, a proclamation which you can make on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we don't want people to get confused, and therefore we're very careful to finish Kol Nidrei before sunset, so people won't get the wrong idea that Nidarim can be released on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Al Kain Hechmiru, that's why we are strict. Lahadchilmu ba'od Yom, to begin the services of Yom Kippur before sunset, so that we'll have at least 3 people present for Kol Nidrei, so that people will not be confused and will remember that Hataras Nedarim requires a public event defined by at least 3 dayanim. Okay, you're beginning to get the idea that the mainstream thinking of the Ashkenaz Poskim is that Kol Nidrei has to do with the declaration of future events. It could therefore be done on Yom Kippur, even after sunset, when Yom Kippur has already begun. It can be done biyachid, in private, if for some reason you cannot get to the synagogue. Next, we're ready now for the text of the Shulchan Aruch. Surely, there's no more influential book in halacha than the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what the Shulchan Aruch says. Leil Yom Kippurim. When Yom Kippur begins, nohagim, it is the custom, it is the practice, not exactly a halachic requirement. She'omer shliach tzibur. Shliach tzibur, the Chazan begins by saying, and these are the words, WebYeshiva shel mala, WebYeshiva shel mata, in the heavenly court, and here on earth, in our rabbinic court, here in the synagogue, there have to be at least 3 people present, al dat makom, taking into consideration God's opinion, al dat kahal, and taking into consideration the opinion of everyone in this community, anu matirim, we hereby permit, and you need at least 3 people, the Chazan and 2 people standing next to the Chazan, we hereby permit, hitpalel ima avaryanim, to pray together with the sinners. This is the statement which introduces Kol Nidrei. We hereby permit praying together with the sinners. What on earth is he talking about? You mean aside from Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to pray with any sinners? Anyone who is chas v'shalom, a avaryan, someone who chas v'shalom didn't keep Shabbos, chas v'shalom, ate pork, someone who's not totally, perfectly, completely a saintly observant of Torah, I'm not allowed to daven with that person. And now all of a sudden on Yom Kippur you are? But according to the Shulchan Aruch, this is the introductory phrase of Kol Nidrei. And as far as I know, this is indeed part of the liturgy. This is indeed part of the standard introduction to Kol Nidrei in every Jewish community I've ever heard of. Nohagim, further, after having stated this introduction, permitting the presence of sinners in the congregation, Omer Kol Nidrei, then the Chazan begins Kol Nidrei. Achakach Omer Shechianu Blokos. Afterwards, after Kol Nidrei, the bracha Shechianu v'Kiyimanu v'Higyanu L'Zman Hazeh is recited, but of course, although that bracha is usually recited al hakos, holding a cup of wine as part of Kiddush on Leil Shabbos or Leil Yontif, obviously on Yom Kippur is a fast day. Obviously, there's not going to be any Kiddush because you're not going to be eating, and therefore Shechianu is recited not as part of Kiddush, but rather the Chazan, the Shliach Tzibur, recites it as the conclusion of Kol Nidrei, and obviously no cup of wine is required because there's no Kiddush, because you're not eating. Now, the Ramah, the Ashkenaz annotator of the Shulchan Aruch, adds the following. Hagah, he always introduces his note with the word hagah, which means note. Nohagim, it is the practice, and of course, he means Ashkenaz practice. Lomar Kol Nidrei Bo'odo Yom. It's our practice to recite Kol Nidrei while it is still daylight before sunset. Mamshich b'nigunim ad alayla, and the melody is to be continued into the night. Kol Nidrei, the text, we say before sunset. The melody continues into the night. As I mentioned earlier today, I said we're going to see some hints, and this is merely a hint. I'm putting a few words into the mouth of the Ramah. He might not approve of what I'm saying here, but here we get some hint, a little indication that what's really important in Kol Nidrei is the melody. The melody has a great impact upon the people, and that is what's important. And indeed, we therefore continue the melody into the night. Omrim oto shalosh pamim, and we say Kol Nidrei 3 times. Kol pa'am magbia kolo yoter mibirishona. And for each repetition, the Chazan's voice is a little louder than the previous time. Again, we're getting a strong hint that what's important here is not so much the content of Kol Nidrei, but the form of Kol Nidrei. There's a content, the text. There's also the form of Kol Nidrei, the melody. And the melody is to be repeated 3 times, each time rising in volume. Again, this is part of what creates the strong impact of Kol Nidrei upon the people. V'chein omer shliach tzibur shalosh pa'amim, and then the Chazan, the shliach tzibur, recites the following verse 3 times. Nislach l'chol adat b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagar b'tocham. The Jewish people, together with all of the converts who have joined them, are hereby forgiven. L'chol ha'am b'shkaga, because the people amongst us who have sinned have surely done so inadvertently. Then the congregation says 3 times the following verse. V'yomer Hashem salachti kidvarecha. The Kadosh Baruch Hu proclaims, indeed, I have forgiven you. Indeed, I have forgiven you as you have requested. Al yishaneh adam min haga'ir. One should never deviate from the customs and the practices of the community. Afilu benigunim, even the melodies are so important and should never be changed. This is not the time for a Rav Shlomo Carlebach melody for Kol Nidrei. It's the traditional melody which has the impact upon the people's souls, and that is what we should maintain. Or piyutim, extra liturgical poems, which add, and good grief, the machzor of Yom Kippur, the reason it's so fat, the reason the machzor of Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, the reason they're so long is because they're chock full of extra poems, of extra songs. One should not change any of the texts. We should do everything exactly the same as previous generations. Is there another place in the Shulchan Aruch where it's the melody and the form rather than the content which is emphasized? No, this is unique as far as Kol Nidrei is concerned. And as we saw last week, the content as it is a little bit weak, and we can see a little bit more evidence regarding the weakness of the content. Well, let's go further. Commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. We just saw the Shulchan Aruch. Now we're going to see the commentaries, principal commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, the Taz. printed on the inside margin of every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch. He's commenting on what the Shulchan Aruch said, Omer Shliach Tzibur B'Yeshiva Shel Mala, commenting on what the Shulchan Aruch instructs the Chazan to introduce Kol Nidrei by saying, in the supernal, in the heavenly court, and here on earth we permit the sinners to daven with us. Lo zacha kan sheyu shnayim imo. The Shulchan Aruch does not mention two people standing next to the Chazan. The Shulchan Aruch speaks only about the Chazan reciting these words. The Shulchan Aruch is silent on whether two people have to stand next to him. I said many times, two people stand next to him, but that wasn't actually in the text of the Shulchan Aruch. The Minhagim, in the books which collect together Minhagim, and he's referring here specifically to the famous Sefer Minhagim of the Maharil, Katuv, it is written, Shetzarich od l'saref shnayim imo. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that you need two people standing next to the Chazan, next to the Shliach Tzibur, but you do, because either we're talking about releasing vows from the past, which cannot be done by less than three people, or we're talking about proclamation regarding the future, which is preferably done in the presence of two or three. Nearly, it seems to me, the Taz says, L'chalek, we must distinguish between cases. Im shliach tzibur hu mitpalel, hu omer nusach zeh. If the Chazan, if the shliach tzibur is going to recite these words, eno tzarich l'tzaref ki hu mishulach min hakahal, v'havi ki'ilu kol hakahal b'yachad omrim ken. Back in the days of the Taz, 17th century Eastern Europe, back in the days of the Taz, still today in many synagogues, there's a full-time appointed chazan. Back in those days, it was absolutely standard in every synagogue. Every synagogue had a full-time appointed chazan who was paid a salary to pray in front of the congregation, to represent the congregation. Well, if it is the chazan, the full-time representative of the community, people think of the chazan as, he's the guy who sings the prayers. But really, what the chazan is the shliach tzibur. The chazan is the representative of the people. He's the people's agent to stand before God. First, you have your own private, silent prayer, just you and the divine presence. And then the chazan representing the people, acting as the agent of the people, stands before God and repeats the prayer. The second prayer recited by the chazan, what we call the repetition of the Shmona Esrei, here the chazan is the agent representing the people. And if the person in shul who recites Kol Nidrei is not just an ordinary member of the synagogue who is being chosen, who is being honored to recite Kol Nidrei, if it's the chazan, well, the chazan is the shliach tzibur, is the representative of the community, and since he represents the whole community, he does not need two people to stand next to him. If an ordinary synagogue member is being honored to lead in Kol Nidrei, well, that person is not the official representative of the community. He is just being called upon. He is just being honored at the moment to lead the prayers. He needs two people to stand next to him. Aval im harav or gadol shebakal omer zeh, if it's the rabbi who has been chosen, or the president of the congregation, if it's just someone being honored to lead Kol Nidrei, lo nikra meshulach. That's not the agent of the congregation. That's not the representative of the congregation. Only the chazan, who's hired as an ongoing as being the ongoing representative of the congregation. He can do it without two people standing next to him. Therefore, if it's the rabbi who's going to say it, or you're going to honor someone in the community to say it, two people have to stand next to him. If it's the shliach tzibur, the one who is the agent of the community, well, you don't need two people. He goes on and says, these are still the words of the Taz. He quotes the Lavush. Remember, we learned a little bit of the Lavush earlier, this disciple of the Ramah from the late 16th century. Holchim shnei chashuvim mekahal v'omdim etzel hachazan. The Lavush says two important people, have to stand next to the Chazan. Hu shlishi, the Chazan is in the third member of the court. Every rabbinic court needs at least three members. That's the only way to permit the sinners to join with the congregation. That's the only way to permit the sinners to pray together with the congregation. We don't yet understand why we need some special permission for that. Well, we'll see. Aval, mishum kol nidrei eino tzarich. As far as Kol Nidrei is concerned, you don't need three people. The Chazan by himself is enough. After all, Kol Nidrei is only a proclamation regarding the future. It's Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, which predominates among Ashkenaz communities. For that, you don't need three. But to permit the sinners to join together with us, for that, you need a bet din of three. Imke, hayala elu ashlosha lelech misham achar amiras b'yeshiva. If you have three people together for that introductory statement, for the introductory proclamation permitting the sinners to pray with us, then once that proclamation has been finished, the Chazan can continue Kol Nidrei by himself, no longer needs two other people standing next to him. Those two people can go take their seats. Lefi Masha Katavti Shetzarich Tziruf Mishum Pirsum, but those who hold, like the Lavush taught us, that although Kol Nidrei can be recited in private, because he's holding it's only a proclamation regarding the future, the more people in whose presence you say it, the better it is, the more publication it has, that's better. Therefore, all the community agrees that they're all saying it together in the presence of everyone else. Therefore, it's better for those two people to continue standing next to the Chazan until the end of Kol Nidrei, and it's as though the people, not as though, then the people are making the proclamation regarding the future before the Chazan together with the two other people. That's more pirsum, it's better, it's a stronger proclamation, and therefore preferable. Masha nohagim l'hashot achar baruch hu, nira de'im hayu holchim kodim, the reason that the two people continue standing next to the Chazan until after Baruch Hu. Why don't they go take their seats earlier? Because we're afraid that if they go take their seats before Baruch Hu, the Chazan might actually say Baruch Hu while they're on their way to their places, while they're on their way to their seats, and they'll be caught in the middle of the aisle. Adayin lo ba'u l'makomim, they won't have reached their chairs yet, their seats yet. Einam yecholim l'chaven, they're going to not be able to have proper concentration on Baruch Hu, and therefore the two people remain standing next to the Chazan until after Baruch Hu, so that they can have proper concentration, and after Baruch Hu, they can go silently to their seats, sit down, and now begin the prayers. That is what the Taz has to contribute to the discussion. Let's continue chronologically. coming into the 20th century. The Mishnah Brura, well, Mishnah Brura was largely active at the end of the 19th century, and the Sefer was actually written at the end of the 19th century, was published right at the beginning of the 20th century. You know, whenever we say so and so was active in the 19th century or so and so was active in the 20th century, it could be that their period of activity overlapped the previous or the following century as well. In any event, the Mishnah Brura was published just at the beginning of the 20th century, and he finally explains to us what was so obvious in earlier generations but is no longer obvious in the beginning of the 20th century and therefore needs an explanation. Who are these sinners who all of a sudden need special permission to pray in the synagogue together with the community? Well, Nikra Misha Avar al Gezeres Tzibur. We're talking about a certain specific kind of sinner. Back in the good old days, when all was right with the world, back in antiquity and in the Middle Ages, communities were very robust, and every Jew, without exception, every Jew, whether in the Near East, whether in Iran, whether in Europe, Spain, it doesn't matter where, all Jews all over the world in antiquity and in the Middle Ages had to be members of a Jewish community. And you had to be a card-carrying member of the community because if you were not, then it was more or less impossible to lead a Jewish life. After all, it's the community which supplied matzah for Pesach. Today, you go to a store and you buy matzah. In those days, there was no such thing. Back in those days, the community baked matzah for its members. If you were not a member of a community, no matzah. Back in those days, the community built and owned the mikveh, which was then available for members of the community to use. If you're not a member of a community, there's no mikveh you can go to. uh, Schooling, education for the children, medical services were supplied by the community. The Beth Din, if you have a financial dispute with someone else, it's the community which would supply the judicial system, the Beth Din, the rabbinic court, which would resolve financial disputes. If you were not a member of a community, you had no legal protections, no Bet Din would take care of your case. No mikveh, no matzah, no education for the children. It was in practice impossible to live a Jewish life without being a member of a community. And back in those days, each community made local legislation, local rules and regulations. We here in this community consider such and such to be so important. We here in this community consider such and such to be so important that anyone who violates such and such a principle is kicked out of the community, excluded from the community, and denied community services. This was an immensely powerful tool to keep everyone in line, obeying and conforming to communal rules and regulations having to do with just about everything imaginable. Uh, uh, among among the problems of someone who did not belong to a community because he or she had been kicked out of the community for having violated communal laws and regulations, well, it's the community which owned the synagogue, and only members of the community were allowed to pray there. If you've been kicked out of the community, if you've been excluded because you violated the rules and regulations of the community, you're not allowed to set foot in the synagogue. Those are the sinners which we're talking about, which is so perfectly obvious to everyone in the good old days when rigid conformity to community standards was absolutely required and standard practice in every Jewish community everywhere. And again, in the 20th century, this was no longer so obvious and had to be explained by the Mishnah Brura. Osha Avar Aver, someone who violated the rules and regulations of the community was deprived of community privileges. Among those privileges, davening in synagogue. Im niduhu, if they kick someone out of the community, anyone who has been ejected from the community can no longer count as one of 10 for a minyan. Oh, יכולים גם כן להתנות להחמיר שלא להתפלל עמו בבית כנסת. People who have been kicked out of the community are not allowed to set foot in the synagogue, even if there already are 10 people there and he's not necessary for the minyan. Well, al kein matirim anu kedei litpalel imahem on Yom Kippur. We lift the cherem. On Yom Kippur, we lift the exclusion from the community and allow those sinners to join us in the synagogue. And why do we do that on Yom Kippur? Because the Gemara says, Kol Ta'anit Tzibur, any public fast day, and Yom Kippur is the public fast day. There are others in the course of the Jewish calendar, but on every public fast day, She'ein Poshe Yisrael, if we don't have the sinners amongst us on a public fast day, if we do not pray together with the sinners on a public fast day, Eino Ta'anit, the fast day is invalid. In order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to smile upon our fast day, in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to accept our fast day, and fasting is analogous to offering a korban. Fasting is analogous to offering a sacrifice on the altar. You offer an animal in sacrifice on the altar, the halev, the fat, and the blood of the animal is being offered on the altar. Hare halbana, sherei chora, one of the ingredients in the Ketoret. Let's spell that correctly on chat. One of the ingredients in the Ketoret, the incense, which was burned in the Beit HaMikdash as part of the sacrificial order, as part of the korbanot, one of the ingredients was halbana. Torah specifies exactly what the ingredients of the Ketoret are, and one of them is halbana. Now, halbana by itself has a very bad smell. Mana katuv im somne ketoret. Nonetheless, the verse insists that halbana, which has a bad smell, be included with the other fragrant spices to compose the ketoret, the incense in the Beis HaMikdash. Well, just as in the sacrificial order in the Beit HaMikdash, we need a little bit of bad to be mixed in with the pleasant smelling spices of the incense, the ketoret. Similarly, on fast day, when we are offering our own bodies by fasting, we are reducing our weight. We are reducing our own bodies, therefore offering our own bodies to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's parallel to a korban in the Beis HaMikdash. We need some of those bad people with us, just like the Ketoret had some bad smell mixed in with the good smells. Well, let's go one step further and complete what the Mishnah Brura teaches us. Shechianu is recited after Kol Nidrei. Gam hatzibur yomer kol echad b'lachash. Everyone should recite Kol Nidrei himself. We're going to get to the women folk who might be at home, who might be in shul. We'll come to them in a moment. But everyone in shul should recite Kol Nidrei himself. Tov shimaharu l'sayem bracha, and everyone should say it himself quickly so as to finish saying your own private Shechianu before the Chazan finishes, so that you can say Amen at the end of the Chazan's bracha. As far as women are concerned, most Ashkenaz women have the minhag, have the practice of saying Shechianu when they light candles at the beginning of Yom Kippur at home before going to the synagogue. The woman who has already recited Shechianu upon lighting the candles will not repeat it in the synagogue. If the woman has not lit candles, only the mother did, or only the sister-in-law did. Not all the women in the household are lighting candles and saying the bracha. The women who have not said Shechianu as part of lighting the candles will recite it in the synagogue together with everyone else, or if for some reason they're not going to the synagogue, will recite it in private together with Kol Nidrei at home. So with this, we've surveyed the principal opinions of the Rishonim. We've seen how this plays out in the thinking of the Acharonim, and we're going to pause at this time. Next week, in this time slot, I'm going to be talking about the Tekiah, the blowing of the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. The blowing of the shofar is the very last thing we do at the end of Yom Kippur. Kol Nidrei is at the beginning. The blowing of the shofar is at the very end of Yom Kippur. Next week, we will focus on the blowing of the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. Until then, you're welcome, you're welcome. Until then, I wish you a good week, a safe week, Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was really, really informative. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. B'kavod.